Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, military doctrine, the practices of military leaders, all to distill from them lessons that we can use in building our businesses and professional practices. And so today, we got kind of a late start. We had some technical glitches, but today I am, very happy to have a friend of mine, Derren Burrell, on the show. If you've seen any of the social media posts promoting it, Derren is a veteran of the United States Air Force. And after he got out of the Air Force, he got into venture capital. Now, I know what you're thinking. Military people don't do venture capital. Yes, they do. There is lots of military people on, I put this in quotes, Wall Street, because Derren is not based in New York. And there is, I think, much to be learned in the military that can be translated into the business world of finance and mergers and acquisitions and such. So looking forward to this conversation. Derren, thanks so much for coming on the show and for sticking with getting the technical.
Hey, it happens, right? We adapt and overcome. So that's the first principle we'll go through. But no, it's a pleasure, Kevin. Appreciate you having me and appreciate what you do to help really strengthen what I believe is very, very needed in education and awareness on the principles that we learn in the military and how they are so applicable into the private sector, and especially in business. So excited to be here and really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, great. Yeah, Derren, I think you and I were both fortunate to serve in the military at a time where we had really the respect and the gratitude of our fellow citizens. And at the same time, the military spends just a tremendous amount of money training us, giving us experience. And so, especially when I have a fellow veteran on the show, I feel like it's our opportunity to give back to our fellow citizens and as well as our veteran colleagues, a little bit of what we got, from them, having the opportunity to serve and having the kind of support that we had. So start, if you would, tell us, what was your experience in the United States Air Force? Where did you start? What was your rank? What did you do? How did that end up? Give us kind of the background story there.
Yeah, I'll try to not put your listeners to sleep. But quick background. I did a full career, 21 years, active duty Air Force. All of it was in the financial management career field. So what does that mean? People typically think it's, a finance officer or a budget officer or something like that. But essentially what I did is I helped, I like to say I didn't fly the planes. I just helped pay for them, right? Anything that takes anything to operate, whether that's at a base, whether that's deployed at the Pentagon. I managed about a $15 billion program when I was stationed at the Pentagon. Combat deployed 5 times, Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkey, even Guantanamo Bay, 12 billion just in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, we like to say that air power is not free. And so we have to help manage those budgets to find the right places to help acquire the things that help our warfighters on the front lines. I finished up my time in the White House, managing the president's communications budget. That was under the Obama administration.
Uh-huh.
And it was there that I made the rank of colonel, or 06, but decided to transition out of the military at that time. I just really felt like there was that I'd been, again, 21 years. I felt like I'd done the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to command. I commanded a squadron in Italy. That was probably the best 3 years of my life.
Wow.
I had been at, at the Pentagon at the high levels, and then again, advising senior White House officials. So I'd done a lot of great things, but I felt like there was something to be done in the private sector. So I got out. It's just been just about 10 years today, or pretty close to it, and transitioned to the private sector, still doing the financial thing, just in the private sector. I'd moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the job was, and spent almost 10 years there, about 9 years. But I immediately.
I'm going to stop you there because I want to stay with your military career if I can for just a couple more minutes. So you mentioned that you oversaw a $15 billion program. With everything that's been going on geopolitically, and don't want to get into the political side of it, but people here, for example, well, the Iranians, they can only fly, sort of, F4s or F-14. What did you work on any of the aircraft programs? My understanding is the Air Force typically at least these days, is flying F-15s and F-16s. Were you involved in any of those kind of programs?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and we can dive down a little deeper into that. So when I was at the Pentagon, we did work on. There were people that worked on full acquisitions of like total aircraft. Biggest one when I was there was the F-35, or the Joint Strike Fighter.
Uh-huh.
F-15s and F-16s been around for a long time. I worked on them, but it was more or less the operations and maintenance, or the upkeep of it. And so, we called it, cost per flying hour. So like an F-15 might cost, $10,000 an hour to fly. And that includes everything. It includes fuel. That includes the parts and things like that. So that's what I did, is really the depot maintenance and the upkeep of the current inventory of aircraft that we had. There were other people that did a lot of acquisition and investments in the future years, but that was a whole. I mean, they really segregated the different types of money that you would use for people, for equipment, for training, and then also for procurement and things like that. So I dabbled in a little bit of all of that, but then when we got stationed at a base, like let's say when I was done with the Pentagon, I went to school for a year, but then moved to Italy, and I took command of the squadron, of the finance squadron that was in Italy. Mm-hmm. That was F-16s, so there were F-16s at that base, and so you'd have several $100 million, let's say 500 million or 300 million, that would use to run that base. And that included everything that you would see in a town, right? The wing commander is kind of like your mayor, and you're kind of like the CFO of the town or something like that. And mm-hmm. so you'd pay for water, your utilities, civil engineering, roads and upkeep, all of that stuff was out of that pot of money, and a portion of that even was for the flying hour program for the F-16s at that particular base. But I worked at bases that had F-15s, F-16s, B-52s, even F-22s when I was at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. So a lot of different aircraft you're exposed to, and even different, completely different mission sets, like a mobility mission when I was in Tampa, of the tankers and being refueled there versus combat aircraft that you have in the fighters and then bombers when I was at Minot. So a lot of different diversity that you learn to try and become a well-rounded officer when you end up go into the senior ranks, and trying to make sure you allocate resources to the right place at the right time. Does that help clarify some stuff?
Yeah, it does. And it's the information you shared, I think, is really important, because for people who are not familiar with the military, so much of the focus on defense spending seems to be on procurement, and yet the bulk of money, at least from my perspective, and I was when I was a chaplain, as you know. My first job was with the Marine Corps in Okinawa, and our entire budget was really supplies, and that kind of day-to-day stuff, right? And I was in charge of all of that, and I think a lot of people don't realize that that really is the majority personnel and those sort of routine day-to-day costs. That's really the majority of the defense budget. And people, there are people in the military, that's what, we do in terms of um, the experience we have handling, money within the Department of Defense. It really is more like what you have out in the civilian world, right? Procurement
Yeah.
in the civilian world too isn't a major issue per se.
Yeah, I mean, I clarify it. The more work goes into to the the what we call it, that operation and maintenance, that day to day stuff. The dollar amounts were bigger in investment. I mean, because Joint Strike Fighter
Okay.
cost about $1 billion, but the dollar amount is easy when you put it all in one contract, right? It's
Right.
different when you're like, okay, I got to give some to the security police, I got to give some to the civil engineers, I got to give some to the command post. You so what you're saying is, from a work standpoint, it's a little bit more challenging because you have a finite amount of resources and you have to do trade-offs with, okay, I have requirements that equal 100 million. I've only got 80 million, so 20 million is not going to get done. So let's figure out how we're going to do this between now and the end of the fiscal year. So definitely could see that the people that are in, like, the Pentagon is where most of the acquisitions take place. And so the program offices there, they get this large amount of money and they're working with the big defense primes, the Lockheed Martins and the Boeings to get those aircraft and stuff. Very important job, but very different than what is happening when you got people, because even with that same pot of, well, not I guess with the same pot of money, but with that same finance squadron, you're also paying the troops, right? So
Right.
all the twice a month, you got people coming in saying, hey, I have this entitlement that didn't show up, or I was overpaid here. That happened pretty rarely, but so that's that you're dealing with both sides of the coin. You're dealing with paying the troops, and you're also dealing with keeping the aircraft in the sky and all the other missions running on base. So that was majority. We moved about 10 times in my 21 years. So we
Wow.
saw a lot of different things, a lot of different bases, and with that comes a different mission set. And so you kind of get an idea of how the fighter world is different than the bomber world, which is different than the tanker world. And so you got all these different things, but it really helps you become, I would say, a more well-rounded financial officer. And I think that actually helps, in that transition to the private sector as well, because you're used to adapting and learning new things and figuring it out that even if it's a little bit different, the same principles of leadership hold true no matter where you are.
Yeah, and you raise another great point, and I saw the same thing in the Navy. So people who are not familiar with the military, which is most of our fellow citizens, they look at each service branch as being pretty homogenous. Whereas I know in the Navy we have different communities. So you have the surface warfare community, you have
That's right.
the air community, you have special operations, i.e., the SEALs, you have the Seabees, the construction battalions, submarines. Each one of these communities not only has its specific tasks that it's charged with completing, but it has a different culture. And
Yep.
I was talking, I can't remember who it was, but a Navy guy that I didn't know when I was in the Navy, and we were. Oh, it was in I'm the president of the Beverly Hills Navy League, and we joke about the Black Shoe Navy and the Brown Shoe Navy, because having been with Naval Aviation for 2 tours, I'm a Brown Shoe Navy guy, and the ship drivers are the Black Shoe Navy. And of course, in the aviation community, we always called them with derision, they're a shoe, meaning a black shoe, right? And it's somewhat of a fun rivalry, but it also shows the diversity of cultures within this larger organization.
100%. Totally agree. It was so funny when I went from a bomber base straight to a fighter base. The different mentalities there. Whereas, if you're in an F-15, going a lot faster than you are in a B-52, right? And so that mentality actually translates to the day-to-day, completion of tasks. There's a different mindset of a bomber than there is in a fighter pilot. So you just kind of have to adjust and to the circumstances around you to the personalities. And so it is definitely true that each base had its own culture, its own mindset, even though we're all still part of the one big, in our case, Air Force, and then even military
Right.
at a higher level.
Yeah. Okay. So now you've made the decision. You're not going to vie to join the Star Club, as I call it, become a general, right?
Right.
You decide to transition to civilian life. So, and you mentioned you moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, I think it was. So,
Right.
tell us about a little bit about that transition, because I think that's also useful for our fellow citizens to understand what that's really like as opposed to what they may hear in the media.
Yeah. So I really, I loved my time in the military. It was a very hard decision for me to decide to transition into the private sector. So when I got to Knoxville, it's not a huge military presence there. A couple of guard units and reserve units, but for the most part, it's pretty civilian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the transition was a little bit more of a challenge than, like, let's say if you retired, in DC or in a military community in San Antonio or something like that. You still got your tribe, if you will.
Right.
So that was part of a challenge, I would guess, when we transitioned over. It wasn't just about the transition for the job, but for the whole family,
Mm-hmm.
because my wife and my children, we have 5 kids. The transition to the private sector, they were used to a military base, they were used to military friends. Easy to make friends that way because you only had a couple of years, so it was quick. But when you go to a community that's not heavily military, then they're nice. They were great people, but they'd also been friends with their neighbors for 20 years, right? And
Right.
still had their families and extended families and everything right there. So it was a little bit more of a challenge, even for my family as well. But we did make the transition. It took probably, I'd say, 2 years to feel like, okay, we're finally out of the military. Because we missed it a lot. And I think that's a testimony to just how great military service can be if you have the right attitude. I still think about it. I'm so glad that I'm back into being into that ecosystem and helping out veterans and working with the Department of Defense now, which we'll get to in a bit, I guess. But so basically, what I did is I got a job as the chief operating officer of a small fiduciary company in Knoxville. About 45 people, about 450 million assets under management, and it was about retirement plans. So it was financial, but as you know, we don't really have 401ks in the military. The closest thing is the TSP, and so I had to learn a whole new industry. Instead of working with the DoD, I worked with the Department of Labor. That's where most of those rules lie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did, you put on your hat just like you do at a new assignment, and you figure out what you need to know, but you still know how to lead when you come out of the military. As you mentioned, the government pours billions into developing our nation's military leaders, right? And they come out of the service with the same characteristics of Fortune 500 CEOs. The resilience, the adaptability, the ability to make decisions in a time-constrained environment, that integrity, that work ethic, all of these things that you learn, whatever you're at, whether you're an E5 or an 07, you have these inherent things that the military breeds in you and that they continue to educate you on with a different professional military education. So I had the ability. I said, well, I don't know a whole lot about 401k plans, but I do know we need a hierarchy here. We need to have SOPs. We need to put in structure, administration, organization. And I think that's something that small business really needs, right? Small business typically doesn't do that. It's just go, go, go. And so when I got to this business and I helped them really put in process management and that ability to execute the mission, it's all about getting things done, but to do it in a manner that is structured and repeatable and documented, that's something they hadn't seen before. And the results were pretty amazing because over the next 3 years, the company went from about less than 500 million assets under management to about 3 billion. The company went from about 45 employees to over 100.
Mhm.
And it ended up leading to being acquired at about a 5x over that 3 years.
Wow.
So it was so that's where I learned that, gosh, the principles that I used in the military are extremely applicable in the private sector. Number one, and number two, as we were growing, they needed additional capital,
Mhm.
and they said, "Hey, you're a money guy. Go find us $2 million." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Well, now I was used to doing that in the military. You just go and submit a requirement, and no problem. But that's
Right.
not that easy in the private sector.
Right.
Uh, so that's where I was first exposed to alternative capital, venture capital,
Uh-huh.
and so I over the next 6 to 9 months is when I learned all about what I wanted about alternative capital, and it was tough. I mean, I got the 2 million. It was definitely a challenge, and that's kind of where I'm like, okay, if it's hard for me, a money guy who's been doing this for a couple of decades, it's going to be hard for a lot of veteran businesses, because the company I was at was led by a veteran.
Mhm.
And then, so that's kind of where I started putting the thinking cap on and thinking, okay, I think I can help solve this problem, because I started to do some research, and I found out that veteran-owned businesses had a disadvantage in getting access to capital. In fact, they're 30% less likely to receive venture capital, even though the BLS statistics show that they out-earn their non-veteran counterparts. So I saw another opportunity. I saw an arbitrage, if you will, that if you get in at a good valuation, you can scale the company quicker, and then you can have that liquidation event in return on your investment in a faster manner.
So
So I
if
kind
I
of,
can interject,
yeah.
were were you able to figure out why veteran-owned businesses were so much less likely to be able to get VC funding? What is the reason behind that, or the reasons behind that?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, there's lots of statistics on it. The main reasons is because when we were out, serving our country on the front lines and being deployed and doing the things that we did to get the mission done, our civilian counterparts were building that network in the private sector and Wall Street and on the banking sector and all of that stuff. They have the capabilities to know where to go for money, and the veterans don't. And that's really what it came down to, is access to capital and those networks. And so, I had shadowed under a couple of VCs and angel investors for about a year before deciding to launch out and start Veteran Ventures Capital, because I thought that learning how to do it and how to manage deal flow and all that kind of important things that I take for granted today, I learned back in the early stages while I was working two jobs.
Mhm.
But that's that was it was all tools, right? Building blocks. I knew that what veterans bring to the table in the business world is dramatically needed,
Mhm.
and I knew that also that we could help bridge this gap in access to capital. So, right around COVID is when I went full time on VVC, and decided to raise our first fund. And
And I'm gonna
so,
I'm gonna I'm gonna stop you there, because I'm
yeah,
gonna take a sponsor break, and then we'll pick it up with VVC.
okay.
America is a maritime nation. Our freedom and security depend on strong sea services. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League stands with our Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine through community support, education, and advocacy. For over 120 years, Americans of all walks of life have heeded our call. No prior military service is required to join our mission. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Help us support those who serve at sea. Visit NavyLeague.org. So this is Business Lessons from the Military, and I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. My guest is Derren Burrell, and Derren was in the first part of the show talked about his career as a finance officer in the United States Air Force, and then his transition to the civilian sector, working for a fiduciary organization, basically helping it expand by sort of orders of magnitude, using what he learned as a finance officer in the military. And so now, Derren, you were just talking about making the transition to being full-time with Veteran Ventures Capital. So yeah, why don't you continue with that, and you know, how did that go, going out on your own, basically?
Well, it was a first couple of years of a lot of lessons learned, if you will. We started raising our fund again in the midst of COVID, and so one of the things you start to learn about in the world of fundraising is that for first time people out the gate, you know, they call emerging managers or first time fund managers. It's really about who you are. It's your relationship. You know, they're investing in you because you don't have a track record of this many deals with this level of return. You know, it's much more statistical driven today than it was when I first started out. And so the best way to do that is to get in front of people, to shake hands, and to travel around. Well, you couldn't do any of that during COVID, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it was a little bit of a challenge, and I think that was something that really helped me later on. I mean, because you still call upon the types of things that you did when you were deployed and you had very little, resources, but you still had to get the job done, right? And so that was one of the, just continually grinding it out is what what we did in the military. And it's kind of what happened during the midst of COVID. We ended up raising about $20 million for our first fund.
Wow.
And really, it was during that time that we started to really assemble the full team. There's 5 folks on the team now, including myself. And so we started to hone out how are we going to invest in veteran-owned and veteran-led type of companies that are that really reflect the military ethos,
Mm-hmm.
but also reflect those characteristics that I told you that we wanted to see thrive in the private sector. And so what we found is that investing in what we knew, which is companies that are really bent on solving technological issues for the DoD.
Mm-hmm.
So where we found that the best investments took place for us was at the intersection of dual use technologies and veteran leadership. So what does that mean? Dual use technologies means it has a governmental or a DoD use, but it also has a private use. So think, space and satellite technology. The government uses that, but so does the private side. Think, drones and autonomy, and even, cybersecurity.
The first thing that came to mind for me was Velcro, which I think was originally developed right for space. Because I'm showing my age, right? But
That's right. Or even GPS for that matter. The government did that too. So yeah, and so that's what we found. That if we connected with those people that were somewhat early stage, they had product market fit, and maybe had their first million or so, but they really wanted to get involved in DoD contracts and acquisition and procurement. Well, gosh, that's what I did when I was active, and what another guy on the team does. So we were able to connect them to the right program office or to the right group of folks that had this all these pots of money that helped spur this innovation to the battlefield, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, just for an example, the budget this year was about $990 billion for DoD, right? A little less than that, 985 maybe. And then about 145 billion of that is research and development related. So if you know the budget, and again, that's kind of what I did in the Pentagon is we help build these budgets. In fact, one of the guys on the team still does reserve duty and is finishing up this week building the budget for next year. And so right now, you can scour those budget documents and you can find out where the government's going to be allocating resources years in advance, and you can find out which areas are growing the most. And so that's what we did. We found out, okay, we know that space is going to be big. We know that quantum is big. We know that cyber is big. C5ISR in general, material science. These are all areas that we invest in because not only do we know them and we can help get them to the right people in the Pentagon, but we also know there's a lot of money there waiting to be allocated to help bring this innovation that the government needs. Everybody knows that DoD is modernizing and that the future of wars really lies in technology, and the defense of our nation is technology and things like that. So So that's what we did. We did that. We were very successful because we invested in 14 companies with that first fund.
Mhm.
But what our value add was is those same 14 companies generated an additional $161 million in non-dilutive funding on top of our equity investments. So that means for about every $1 million that we invested, we were able to get Uncle Sam to back these companies with 10 million bucks of non-dilutive money. So that could be in the form of research like SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research Grants, could be in the form of a DARPA RFP, or could be in the form of a congressional ad. We've done all of those things that not a lot of people know about or understand. Defense, defense tech investing is now in vogue, but it wasn't back then. It was just getting started, and we kind of had a leg up on that. And so that's really what we thought was pretty important, because when you invest in a company and then you get additional money from the government, it de-risks the investment for our investors. It helps these companies scale further, faster, but they also don't need to raise as much, because you get $10 million from the government. That means your future rounds aren't as big, which it decreases dilution for my investors.
Right.
And they don't have to give, the entrepreneurs love it, they don't have to give away as much of their company. So you have this win-win-win when it comes to helping these companies scale and lead to faster liquidity events. Because if you get, let's say you start off with $1 million in revenue, and then you get a couple government contracts and you're getting up to 20 million in revenue, well, that then increases the likelihood of that major defense prime, like we talked about earlier, the Lockheed or the Boeing, or even today, Anduril and SpaceX, or Palantir, someone like that. They could actually say, okay, I like that technology, government needs it, I need it, let me just go ahead and acquire it. And they buy the company at whatever, 6, 7, 10 times revenue, and there's my 10x return for my investors, and everybody wins. And so that's what we did with Fund 1. And now we're wrapping up our Fund 2 raise.
If I can interject for a second, what I found so interesting about what you were saying is, when it came to raising capital, veterans were behind the curve because they didn't have established networks, because we were in the military while other people were doing that. You actually sort of turned that on its head. So you went and said, in essence, where do I already have an established network that I can then pull into the private sector and use? And so in essence, you were able to compete, head to head with people who had been building their networks all along by using the network you had already developed and kind of repurposing it, so to speak. Does that sound?
Yeah. Well, that's very insightful, because what we found is that there's a lot of what we call spectator investors today that are trying to invest in DoD, but they don't have the same knowledge of the acquisition and regulatory framework, the bureaucracy of working at the Pentagon, who to talk to for what pot of money. We had that because we'd done that on the other side of the coin, right? So having that expertise, if you have the subject matter expertise of dealing with the government, it's not hard to work with them. Because for years, what I heard is, oh, you don't want to do business with the government because you can't get anything done. And if you don't know what you're doing, they're not wrong, okay? But if you know what you're doing, and we see a big movement of this, even our current administration, to try and streamline operations here and there. But even so, these billion-dollar funds that are spraying and praying a bunch of capital across everything, that's a lot different than what we do. We are laser focused. We will invest and really feed our winners with multiple rounds, because we know that what the DoD wants, these guys have. And then once we get one contract, you get that past performance with the government, and you can get a lot. And so that it really helps the whole ecosystem. I'd love to see military service become the gateway to entrepreneurship. And the way I can do that is by helping my investors make a lot of money, right? Because if I can get these companies to have tremendous exits, and then I see people along the side of the road watch these people get, unicorn status, and they're like, hey, I want to go do that too. Let me go serve my country, And so they get those same principles, the education paid for, the different levels of leadership development, and then they come out and they're like, okay, I'm ready to bring something new to the fight and disrupt some sort of industry, and we're able to do that. And so that's really what I think, my initial inertia was for starting Veteran Ventures. It's grown a lot since then. Our second fund is more than triple of what our first fund is. And so we've been able to show, like I said before, it was a lot of relationship based, but having the track record of 10 times governmental money, but for every dollar we invested, that really helped strengthen our position. And institutions now, endowments and states and things like that are backing us where they weren't in the first fund. So it really is uh, it's awesome feeling. We call it a triple bottom line impact. You get to help out strengthen our national security. You get to help transitioning veterans, and you get to make a return. We love what we do, and it helps just motivate me every morning to get up to know that there's a purpose. And just like we had in the military, right? You're serving in something a lot bigger than yourself, and so it's exciting, and I think that it now is a little bit more in vogue to be in the defense space, and it wasn't when we first started. So I think that's interesting too.
So what you said about bringing more people from the military into entrepreneurship, post World War II, there was a huge surge of veterans.
Absolutely.
And some of the biggest companies around, the first one that comes to mind is Fred Smith. I always forget whether he was FedEx or UPS, but
FedEx.
Right, FedEx, right? One of the biggest shipping companies in the world, right? That Fred Smith was a veteran, right? And then we saw a decline in veteran entrepreneurship, coming out of kind of the Vietnam War era, unfortunately. And like you, I've always thought that entrepreneurship is a natural place for military veterans to go, because so much of what we do and learn in the military is similar to what one needs to know and be able to do in business. Now, my career was the opposite. I was in business for 20 years before I joined the military, so I kind of saw it in the other direction. And I brought business practices, to the operation, for example, of the base chaplain's office in Okinawa. And I was saying, well, like I remember one of the first days I showed up, I'm like, I was made supply officer, and I said, hey, where's the master inventory of all the supplies that we have? And the poor petty officer looks at me and says, what's that, sir? Right. So it's funny, the sort of back and forth, cross feeding, if you will, that both the military and the civilian sector can benefit if there is more sort of oil, if you will, to grease that that movement. And that's where I see Veteran Ventures Capital really providing that grease, that oil, that to make them work more smoothly together.
Yeah, and I think what you said deserves a little bit more of peeling the onion back, because there was an amazing legacy of veterans that started some, not just businesses. It wasn't just a mom and pop shop. They revolutionized industries, and not only in the U.S. stage, but on the global stage. FedEx is a big one. Walmart, GoDaddy, Enterprise Rental Car, U-Haul, USAA, Nike, even Domino's Pizza, Remax. These are massive, multi-billion-dollar companies, and it took a mindset of someone that had some discipline. They were, resilient. They knew how to work as a team. It's just, and they had strong integrity. As I'm sure that you heard, Fred Smith passed away yesterday, and
oh no, I didn't hear. Oh my goodness. Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was 80 years old, and was one of the consummate professionals. I met him at a veteran event of a group I used to work with, Bunker Labs, which is a entrepreneurial program to help veterans and spouses start businesses. And he was a speaker there. We talked, and I tried to get him to invest in Veteran Ventures, but that was a long time ago. Almost had him to, but he was one of those people. One of the things that I think is another hallmark of veterans is taking responsibility. If he had a bad quarter, he owned it, right? And he was just a real model of integrity and of leadership, and certainly has left behind a huge legacy. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to build more Fred Smiths, right? We're trying to help these companies do some amazing work to, again, transform the areas that they're in, but also, it is, I want to have a fund 3 and a fund 4 and a fund 5 or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And that means I got to generate a return. And so it's got to be a good business case. It's got to have the right team in place. And then we'll help you get the scaling operation done when you've got that foundation, So yeah, it's exciting.
So, another aspect of this is kind of following on your remarks about the veterans coming out of World War II. I'm not sure people really appreciate. We won World War II in part, maybe largely in part, because we logisticized, if that's a word, right? The actors.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, for every one, soldier in the field or sailor on a ship, there were, the estimates are somewhere between 7 and 10, supporting that soldier or sailor or Marine, airman, and that's a massive operation to support that. And so the veterans coming out of World War II, maybe for the first time, had the knowledge of really creating large companies with global scale, and seeing it could be, first of all, knowing it could be done successfully because they did it in the military, but then having the confidence that they could replicate that in the civilian sector. And I think that's true today. The scale may not be as massive. We don't have 18 million, people in uniform in the U.S. military today, but that ratio of, one soldier in the field to, 7 to 10 supporting, that still exists because that's what it takes to, run that kind of organization. So I'm curious your thoughts on that aspect.
Yeah, well, let's think about this. Okay, so what you said is true. It was upwards between 60% to 70% of returning veterans started businesses. And what transpired is that the U.S. economy dominated the world stage for decades to come, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's fast forward to today. Today's veteran is much more educated. They have tons more experience in learning how to get things done because there's technology. There is, again, the different levels of schooling that the government provides gratis, or they'll even pay for your master's degree. I mean, I got 3 master's degrees while I was in the military. So that they give you all of these additional tools that didn't have 40 years ago, and so that is important because I think that we are in a better position than we were back then, and yet something's not right because we are not starting businesses in the same manner that they did back then.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because, in my opinion, there's really a couple of different factors, but one is educating the first of all, educating the veterans as they transition that there's more than just going back and becoming a GS civilian or becoming a contractor. Those are very valuable, jobs. We need them. And so I'm not denigrating those at all, but there's a whole world out there where you're used to, and you can thrive in an autonomous environment by leading your own company and by helping get the mission done in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that we need to communicate better to our veterans. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's been a sincere push to do that over the last 5-7 years or so. So I think that's great. And then I think also we need to make sure that we are touting the strong leadership and development characteristics that the military provides our veterans. We don't need to be dwelling on the negative. There are certainly problems with some forms of people that transition out. Mm-hmm. PTSD is a real thing. All that stuff is true, but that affects about 15% at most. Right. Depending on what stats. 15% of the military. 85% of the military is ready to rock and roll no matter what. That 15% can easily be brought into the rest of that. But mm-hmm. What I'm trying to say is, that sometimes we do a disservice to our veterans by always focusing on the the problem areas, the areas that we need to be addressed. I'm not saying that, but I'm also saying that there is a massive amount of talent that's coming out that has the ability to lead as a Fortune 500 CEO. They both have the same amount of experience, 25 years or so, and
Right.
they just need to be given the same opportunity that their civilian counterparts are. And I think that's what we try to do at VVC. And I think there's plenty of people in the veteran, I guess, entrepreneurial ecosystem,
Mhm.
like Bunker Labs, now merged with the IVMF, or the Institute of Veterans and Military Families. That's a great organization out of Syracuse to kind of absorb Bunker Labs. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's tools out there today that and there's resources and now the capabilities of our veterans. We should be doing it again. We should lead the next several decades of entrepreneurship and business development in the private sector, because that's what we're good at. We're good at building things, executing the mission, getting things done, and helping move the entire ball forward as a team.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We have very similar experiences in terms of veterans coming out of the military. I when I first went off of active duty, I thought because I had already had a couple of decades of experience in the private sector, so it would be natural for me to coach veterans who are or coach military people making that transition. And what I found was so many of them figured, well, the next thing to do is, like you say, go get a GS job. And one of my friends in particular, I'll mention his name and give him a free plug here, John Rubino. John was a naval flight officer. And when the first time we spoke, that's what John told me. He said, well, I think I'm going to get a GS job, or maybe I'll go to work for a defense contractor, because I did defense procurement, when I was at the Pentagon, blah, blah. And I said, well, what other kind of things are you doing? So he started talking about how with a partner, like at that time, it was about, I think, 5, 6, 7 years before, he had started a small real estate company. And he started talking about the projects he did. And there was a marked change in the level of enthusiasm between him talking about getting a GS job and talking about the real estate investment projects he put together. And and I finally said to him, I said, why are you not going to go into your real estate business and pursue that? You obviously have a great deal of passion for it. And look, I don't want to say, so I don't want to take credit for it, but in the end, he, talking with his wife and his partner, he decided that that was a better way to go. And here he is, a number of years after retiring from the Navy, and the portfolio of investments that his company with his partner deal with, it's grown, I think, tenfold.
Mhm.
That's tremendous. We're talking about eight, maybe close to 9 figures, of investments, and it's really tremendous. And he's just really loves what he's
Yeah.
doing, and that, I think that's so important as well. You mentioned something earlier about that having a purpose in VVC is so important to you. I also
Right.
found that was a really key for veterans to thrive. They need to feel there's a purpose to their work. And I wonder if you would talk a little bit more about that, because I think this is really an issue in the civilian workforce, where it seems like every other day I'm reading about how disconnected Gen Z is from their jobs, or they feel like they're not really doing anything of value. Talk, if you would, about how you see purpose in one's work, and how that plays out, both kind of military and civilian.
Yeah, it's a great thought. I gotta say, you gotta know what really drives you, and I think that when you're serving in the military, there is a sense of a higher calling, right? For me, there's always been my faith, and that's number one. My family, and is number two, and then it's everything else, right? But everything ties back into those first two things for me. And so having an opportunity to serve and to strengthen our nation while I was serving, and making sure that we didn't have another 9/11, I was looking to get out, do my 5 years or 4 years and then get out after. I went to college at the Citadel, got a commission, and then went in. And I was looking to get out when we were stationed in MacDill Air Force Base back in 2011 or 2001, excuse me. And then 9/11 happened, and I was actually deployed during 9/11. I was in Kuwait, coming back from a deployment there, and we were actually diverted. We were in the air when the planes hit the New York, and so we got diverted to Portugal for an extra week because they locked down the skies. And I remember seeing back then all they had was CNN, and they just in the PAX terminal they just kept showing and hitting both buildings, and so I was like, oh, I'd been gone away from the family, but there was a sense of really got to get back into the fight, if you will. And so that's where came back, and I felt led to stay in after that point and say, okay, we're not going anywhere. So anyway, this idea of always finding something bigger to be a part of, I think that should be a drive of folks. It shouldn't just be about compensation, or it shouldn't just be about whatever. It should be who you are as a person helps you make those decisions, right? So when I got out, and even when I was with this company in Knoxville, well, 401k management, that was pretty big. That was a large portion of what we do in the private sector. All these businesses had this ability to help people retire with dignity and things like that. So I could even get onto that, but I did miss the camaraderie and the unit cohesion and what comes into the military. And so getting back into it with VBC, of finding these veterans that are building these teams, that are building these technologies, and that are helping strengthen the overall industrial complex and the defense complex, and again contributing to our nation's security. I am back at it again, and it's exciting, and it's that purpose that you're doing something that goes far beyond what you or what your firm is, and helps provide for the family. It helps strengthen the things that you believe in and that you feel like you can be a part of. So I think it's important to have that inner drive, if you will, and for me, the foundation is faith and family, but it's also the being a part of really what has made our country great, right? Our strong military, our strong belief in freedom, and integrity and discipline and excellence, things that the military stands for, that is perfectly applicable in the private sector as well.
Right. I mean, I think that may in fact be the key business lesson from the military, because you talked about the quality of leadership, the ability to handle large projects, the ability to teamwork. All of these things were critical to your success. I think, though, I've seen this time and time again, the young person who comes into the military, they're fairly aimless. They feel they don't seem to have been able to grab onto life in any significant way. And the military shows them how to live a life with purpose. And that's what turns it around for them. And once they've had a taste of that, I think most people carry that through the rest of their life, or at least carry through the desire to live a life of purpose through, for the rest of their life. And like I said, that to me, and I've never thought about it until what you just said, but that may be the most important business lesson from the military is it shows people one can live a life of purpose, and how powerful that is.
Yeah, I agree. The desire to serve does not go away when you take off the uniform. And so that's important, that you find that same outlet of, trying to continue to give back, to do something. I go back to, I think, mission execution, getting things done. That's a hallmark of a veteran, and who in business would not want that? Absolutely. And so the idea of doing that, well, we could go on and on about it, but I totally agree with you. And I think this has been, just like you said, the things that really what makes our nation great and what makes our nation's military great. It's also what helps us drive us in the private sector too when we make that transition.
Yeah. Well, Derren, thanks so much. Our time is up, unfortunately, but I really appreciate you being on the show today and sharing your, a little bit of your life history and your thoughts on what the military brings in terms of creating success in the civilian sector. So, I'm going to do a little wrap up here, and then we'll go offline and chat for just a minute. So thank
Great.
you
Well,
all.
thank you again.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. So thank you all very much for joining us. I've seen we've had a number of live viewers cycle through, so that is an attestation to Derren, I think, less so than me. So always great to know people are out there watching us live. Just real quickly, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And my guest, and I'm going to bring up his name because otherwise I'll mangle it. My guest is John Solider, and John is, he's a serial entrepreneur like me. We're the same vintage. We figured out, and John is going to share with us what he's learned over, really a lifetime of entrepreneurship. What he sees as being the keys to success in starting and growing a business. So I hope you'll join me tomorrow again at 10 a.m. Pacific time for People Making Money. And then next week, Monday, 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. The topic is self-explanatory. And then 1 week from today, I'll be back for the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So once again, Derren, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. And signing off, as I always do, a tremendous military supporter was my friend Marie. You are and ever will be my belle.